My name is Graham Porter, and I was sitting at my home desk with a lukewarm cup of green tea and a contract open in front of me, highlighting amendments in Clause 6.3 regarding intellectual property rights. It was a deal I'd been negotiating for 3 weeks between a small but promising renewable energy firm and a German investor with tight conditions. Elise's firm was the beneficiary. She was the reason this deal even existed. Correction, I was the reason. I had vouched for her, secured the meeting, and built the bridge with someone I'd gone to grad school with. That mattered in this industry. Names mattered. Reputations mattered. Elise often said she liked the way I smoothed edges. But now, as I ran my pen under the final bullet point, my phone buzzed with a message so sharp it cut deeper than any clause ever could. It was from her. 14 words. Don't come to the company's party. It's only for successful partners. I didn't even blink at first. I stared at the screen, rereading it like I had missed something. There had to be a mistake. Elise didn't joke like this. She was a calculated woman, measured, ambitious, and dangerously articulate. But even she wouldn't send something that cruel by accident. And yet there it was. A period at the end, not even an emoji to soften the blade. I felt a strange cold creep through my chest. Not anger, not even sadness. It was the sting of recognition. I had been erased. Not just uninvited, but dismissed. Disqualified from her world by her own hand. It's the kind of thing you don't realize is happening while it's happening, until it hits you all at once, like stepping outside and noticing the house you helped build no longer has your name on the deed. I replied with one word, understood. Not because I was calm, but because that was the only word left in me that didn't taste like desperation or regret. I set the phone down without watching for the 3 dots to reappear. I knew they wouldn't. Elise had already moved on from me, from us, from the narrative where we were building something together. She was at the part of the story where the side character no longer fit. But I wasn't just going to sit there and absorb that kind of insult. Not after everything I had done. Not after how far I had gone to make sure her dream didn't collapse in its first year. I reached down and opened my encrypted drive. Folder, Asset Structuring. Subfolder, Private Guarantees. Inside was every document I'd kept hidden for 9 years because I trusted her, because I never thought I'd need a safety net from someone I shared a life with. But now, I needed clarity. I opened the PDF labeled Loan Guarantee Agreement, GP. There it was, my signature, clean and confident. The clause Elise had insisted was standard, the one I had co-signed without blinking. It was the backbone of the $1.5 million startup loan that had launched Porter and Crest. Of course, the bank had hesitated. Elise was unproven, her credit stretched thin by graduate school debt, and a car loan she defaulted on 5 years back. But me? I was the safe bet. Solid income, clean financial history, no risk. I remembered the meeting with the bank officer vividly. Elise had squeezed my hand under the table when they finally stamped the approval. I was proud of her, proud of us. But now I saw it clearly. That loan never would have gone through without me. And not once, since signing that document, had she acknowledged what that meant. She didn't even include me in the decision to host the party, let alone plan it at a venue that cost more than our wedding reception. I kept reading the fine print on the PDF, my breath steadying with each line. Clause 7.2. Voluntary guarantor withdrawal. It was rare, obscure, but it was there. The guarantor, me, could formally initiate a disassociation pending the company's restructuring or evidence of material misrepresentation. And the best part? I didn't need her permission to trigger it. I smiled, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to see Elise fall, but because I needed something of mine back, something she had taken with that text. My dignity, my voice, my presence. I opened a new email to Jasper Molina, my financial lawyer and one of the only people I trusted enough to involve in this. I attached the loan file and typed, "We need to initiate removal proceedings. Use clause 7.2. Let's be quiet and fast." I hesitated before hitting send, not because I doubted the decision, but because for the first time in 9 years, I wasn't protecting her. I was protecting me. The version of Graham Porter who had bent over backwards for a woman who, in the end, had only been interested in the convenience of him, not the core. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring at the wall like it might offer a reason, an explanation, a time machine. But none of those came. What came instead was the sound of silence. Heavy, thick, undeniable. The kind of silence that follows truth. Elise had drawn the line. I had simply decided to step back from it. Elise used to say things that sounded like love, but were really instructions disguised as compliments. Your stability gave me room to be bold. She told me the night she launched the firm, champagne flute in hand, her heels tapping out victory on our kitchen tile. I didn't mind the background then. I liked it, actually. I liked being the scaffolding. I liked knowing my reliability gave her the space to swing for the fences. I never once thought about whether I was in the picture she was painting, only that I helped stretch the canvas wide enough for her to make her strokes. I paid off her grad school loans within the first 18 months of our marriage. She'd been drowning in them, and I'd just received a bonus from the firm I was with at the time. I didn't tell her I'd taken on an extra consultancy to make it work. I didn't tell anyone. Just made the final payment, printed out the confirmation, and tucked it under her breakfast mug with a sticky note that said, "No more chains." She cried. She kissed me. Then she went back to work like nothing had changed. She moved fast. That was Elise's thing. Build fast, pivot faster. By the second year, she came up with the idea for a boutique consulting firm focused on branding strategies for female-led startups. I loved it. I loved her vision, her fire, her sense of purpose. And I knew it would be hard to convince investors. So I let her use our house as collateral for the seed round. Not the spare property, not an unused account. Our home, the one I'd put the down payment on, the one we painted together that first summer, the one where my name still appeared first on the mortgage papers. I didn't ask for recognition. I never wanted to be plastered on the website or stand in front of cameras. But I thought the name, Porter and Crest, meant something. Porter was me. It was us. It was our foundation. Crest was Elise's vision. Together, it sounded like legacy. It sounded like something we built as one. But somewhere along the line, I became a footnote. I noticed it first in meetings, when she'd introduce me not as her husband but as Graham from accounting. It stung, but I laughed it off. After all, I'd handled some of her early books. She called it strategic distancing for clients. Then she stopped bringing me all together. Said it was easier to navigate investors if they saw her as independent. I told myself I understood. Told myself it was temporary. But it wasn't. It was a transition. One I didn't see clearly because I was still too busy playing the part of the good partner. I noticed other things too. Her email signature dropped the shared surname, just Elise Crest. She explained it was cleaner, more marketable. The photos on her site changed. The old ones. The ones where we stood together at her first client presentation disappeared. Rebranding, she said. Modernizing. I told myself I didn't need to be visible to matter. I told myself love wasn't about who was seen. But late at night, when she came home flushed with stories of investor dinners, and I was sitting at the table eating reheated leftovers, I started to wonder if she even saw me anymore. Or worse, if she had ever seen me the way I saw her. Then came the business profiles. She'd been featured in Rising Founders, then in TechNext's Faces of Disruption spread. And in each article, she mentioned her struggles, her persistence, her brilliance, but never the person who made the first loan meeting happen. Never the man who spent 2 months crafting her original pitch deck, sliding PowerPoint templates around until 2 in the morning while she slept on the couch. My name wasn't just missing. It was scrubbed. Like it had never mattered. I brought it up once. Carefully. Quietly. Over dinner. I said, "Do you ever think we lost sight of how this started?" Elise didn't look up from her wine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we built this together. It doesn't feel like that anymore." Her fork paused midair. "Graham, you've always been more behind the scenes. You're not in branding. That's not your thing." I smiled then. Not because it was funny, but because that's when I realized how far we drifted. To her, I wasn't a co-founder or a partner. I was the warm body she leaned on during storms but ignored in the sunshine. I was the safe harbor, the fallback plan, the human version of a security deposit. Elise didn't want a husband, she wanted an asset. A reliable, low-risk, high-return investment she could cash out whenever she saw fit. And I had allowed it. I had stayed silent every time she diminished my role, every time she skipped over my name in meetings, every time she presented our sacrifices as hers alone. Not because I was weak, but because I thought that's what support looked like. I believed in her more than I believed in the need to be seen. That was my mistake. I kept thinking she'd remember, that she'd look back and say, "I couldn't have done this without you." But she didn't. And now, with that 14-word text, she'd made it clear, I wasn't part of her future. I was just the scaffolding she no longer needed. She had climbed high enough, and now she was tearing the structure down. I used to think love was about being whatever the other person needed. But I was wrong. Real love is reciprocal. It's mutual risk, shared credit, joint accountability. Elise once said she loved me because I gave her space to be bold. What she really meant was, you won't get in my way. And now that I was finally standing still, she saw that as dead weight. But here's the thing. When someone uses you only for your strength, they forget that strength can also walk away. The Lyon Club wasn't just another venue, it was a statement. The kind of place where polished ambition clinked against crystal glass, where every corner smelled of money and old power. It sat 28 stories above the city, glass walls stretching floor to ceiling, offering a view of a skyline Elise used to say she'd conquer someday. I used to smile when she said it. I wanted to believe she would, and I believed I'd be there beside her when she did. But that was before the invitation I never received. I wasn't even supposed to know there was a party. That's the part that still twists like glass in my chest. I found out from Marla, her assistant, who bumped into me in the lobby of my office building 2 days before the event. Graham, she'd said, juggling an iced coffee and a tablet. You're coming Friday, right? Elise said the guest list was small, only people who really matter. I blinked. What's Friday? She tilted her head, confused. The rebrand party. For Porter and Crest. Her words hung there, innocent as a match before the spark. She didn't mention it. I shook my head slowly. No, she didn't. Marla's smile faded. I assumed. I'm sorry. I just thought. She trailed off, tapping her screen nervously. Forget I said anything. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. That night, I went home and found Elise standing at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine half drunk beside her. She looked up briefly, her eyes bright from whatever glow-up filter her world now operated in. Long day? She asked, not pausing what she was reading. Not bad, I replied. I waited. I gave her a chance. But she never brought it up. Not the party. Not the rebrand. Nothing. So I didn't ask. I simply watched. Watched as she floated through the kitchen, talking to Camden on speakerphone about caterers and lighting schemes. No, not rose gold. It washes out on camera. I want deep copper tones. Something grounded, she said, voice sharp and decisive. When she hung up, I asked her how work was going. She said, busy. Exciting. We're making moves. That was it. No mention of Porter. No mention of me. That was when I knew. This party wasn't about the company. It was about erasure. A controlled burn of the past. Elise had finally decided to finish what she'd been quietly starting for months. And she chose to do it in a room full of people. With champagne. And applause. That night I sat at my desk with the lights off, the city twinkling beyond the window, and I pulled up the company website. The banner had changed. The name still said Porter and Crest, but the font had shifted, smaller, bolder, tighter spacing. I opened the page source, dug into the metadata. The new branding was already loaded, hidden, waiting to be published. And in it, the word Porter was gone. Just Crest Strategies. Sleek. Polished. Singular. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The weight of what I'd built, of what I'd willingly handed over, settled like a stone on my chest. I'd given her everything. My name, my credit, my faith. And now she was repackaging success without the evidence of where it came from. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe she thought I wouldn't care. Maybe she assumed I'd just keep being useful, even while being invisible. But something had shifted in me. Something irreversible. I didn't feel rage, not yet. Just a slow, tightening resolve. I wasn't going to crash the party. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table I helped build. No, I had other plans. Quiet ones. Sharp ones. Plans that didn't need a spotlight to be effective. I made a list that night. Not of revenge, but of retrieval. Things with my name on them. Financials. Guarantees. Intellectual property. Anything I'd signed, funded, or floated. And then I made a separate list of silence. Every time she diminished me. Every time she used me without acknowledgement. Every time she stepped over me to be seen by someone else. The lists were long. Longer than I'd expected. By the end, I wasn't even sad anymore. Just clear. The next day, I showed up to work early. I asked my assistant, Jordan, to find the original trademark documentation for the business name. Just a personal errand, I told him. He didn't ask questions. He brought them in an hour later. My signature was on the filing, mine and Elise's. Back when the name Porter meant stability, integrity, legitimacy. I smiled at that, because if she was planning to drop me from the business, she'd have to do more than redesign a logo. She'd have to buy me out, release me, undo everything legal and binding we had built. I didn't think she was prepared for that, but I was. That Friday, while Elise toasted herself 28 stories above the city, I sat in my car 2 blocks away. I could see the Lyon Club lights flicker through the trees. I could picture her in something silver, holding a glass high, her smile wide and calculated. They'd be playing ambient jazz, maybe some house remixes. Camden would be nearby, playing the supportive exec. The clients would be nodding, clapping, and the world would believe the myth that she'd done it all herself. That the name Porter had been a placeholder, a fluke, an old brand she'd evolved past. And that's when I decided I wouldn't just remove my name from the signage. I'd remove it from everything. I wouldn't be her backup plan, or her safety net, or her silent foundation. I would become the question she didn't want to answer, the silence behind the missing piece. Because she didn't just forget me, she erased me. And now, I'd return the favor. 3 years ago, Elise came home late from a meeting, face drawn and lips tied in a way that told me something had gone wrong long before she said it. She poured herself a glass of wine before even taking off her heels, then stood silently at the sink, swirling the Cabernet as if she could find answers in the glass. I remember putting down my laptop and watching her, knowing she was searching for a way to make the ask sound smaller than it was. "Graham," she said finally, not looking at me, "I need a favor." That was how it always started, favors. Not needs, not responsibilities. Just a gentle tug wrapped in diplomacy. Cash flow's tight. The investors are nervous. Camden's trying to hold the line. But we're going to lose momentum if we don't inject more confidence into the boardroom. I leaned back, already sensing what was coming. What kind of favor? She finally turned to face me, her eyes soft with performance, like she already knew the play would work. "We just need a signature. To co-sign a secondary line, just to reassure them. They love your credit score. It's nothing more than a formality." That word, formality, has echoed in my head more times than I care to count. It was Elise's favorite tool, a scalpel she used to cut hesitation out of any situation. At the time, I didn't push back. I didn't ask to see the full documents. I didn't question why the firm needed another $500,000 when she'd told me they were projecting surplus by the end of the quarter. I just signed, because I believed in her, because I believed in us, because I thought that's what partners did. I was wrong. I wasn't her partner. I was her guarantee, not in the poetic, vow-exchanging sense, in the literal, financial one. I was the fallback if things went sideways, the insurance policy tucked into her back pocket. She didn't need my ideas. She didn't want my input. She just needed my stability, my reputation, my name on the dotted line to turn nervous lenders into eager ones. And I gave it to her, without terms, without resistance, without understanding just how easily someone can start to see the hand that lifts them as something they've earned rather than something they're lucky to have. For the next year, things seemed fine on paper. The firm grew. Elise traveled more. Her phone was constantly buzzing with new clients, new opportunities, new accolades. I became the footnote to her momentum. Her wins became solo. Her struggles were outsourced. And I began to notice that we had become I in her vocabulary. I landed the Crest deal. I secured the retention package. I got us into the equity summit. I was still paying the mortgage, still fixing the heater when it gave out, still filing our joint taxes. But in her world, I'd stopped existing except when a new guarantee was needed. The shift was gradual, like fog creeping in through open windows. But once it settled, it was impossible to ignore. She stopped asking my opinion about business moves. She stopped telling me where she was going. She started taking trips with Camden that were just strategy weekends and brand deep dives, always returning with a new necklace or shoes I hadn't seen before, never once offering a receipt or explanation. I wasn't naive. I saw the signs, but I didn't confront them. I convinced myself that silence was strength, that enduring her distance with grace was more valuable than demanding the truth. After all, I was still her husband. Wasn't I? That title had to mean something. But then came the night we attended a gala for women in innovation. Elise was being honored for her work at Porter & Crest. The program listed her bio. There was a paragraph about her rise, her drive, her brilliance. And at the bottom, a single line. Elise lives in the city with her golden retriever, Luna. No mention of me. No husband. No home we shared. Just the dog. I asked her about it afterward, gently. She waved it off. They want to frame me as independent. It's branding, Graham. It's not personal. But it was. It always was. I had become invisible. Not in a way that required pity, but in a way that demanded action. Because while she stood in front of rooms receiving applause, I was standing behind a wall of legal documents I'd signed to keep her dream afloat. And that dream no longer had room for me. When I looked back at the financials, really looked, I saw how far I'd extended myself. My name was tied to every major liquidity event the firm had. I wasn't just a co-signer. I was the reason they'd stayed solvent during 2 critical quarters. I was the guarantee they leveraged into growth. And now that they had outgrown me, at least in Elise's eyes, she was happy to unhook my name from the brand, from the narrative, from her life. I started sleeping in the guest room. Not because we fought, but because the silence between us was louder than any argument. Elise didn't ask why. She didn't check in. She didn't even pause. Her world had already shifted. I was just catching up. But that wasn't going to last. Because the one thing she didn't count on was that the man who made everything possible could also be the one to unravel it. Quietly. Legally. Completely. The guarantees she leaned on had an expiration date. And I was about to sign that too. I called Jasper Molina the morning after I found the draft rebrand hidden in the site's back end. My hands were steady, my voice even. That surprised me. I thought I'd be angry, volatile even. But no, there was only a clean, precise calm that settled in the space Elise used to occupy. Jasper picked up on the second ring. Graham, he said, already alert. We'd known each other since undergrad, had played poker on Thursdays until life and work and marriages reshaped our rituals. But he still knew the difference between my everyday voice and the one I was using now. You all right? I need to talk through a guarantor clause, I said. When I signed 3 years ago, Elise's firm, the $1.5 million line, he asked without skipping a beat. You mentioned it once. I want out. A pause. Papers shuffled on his end. You're not necessarily stuck, depending on how the clause was drafted. You got the original doc. I'll send it in 10. He met me at his office that afternoon, his legal pad already half filled with notes and terms. Okay, he said, pushing his glasses up as I took a seat across from him. The good news is, this is survivable. And the bad, there'll be fallout. Elise will be notified the moment the lender receives our intent. That means she'll know you pulled the thread. I want her to know, I said. He blinked, processing that. All right then. He laid the document out between us, highlighting Section 12B release conditions. Clause allows for the guarantor to be removed if they formally withdraw during a non-default period, provided the company hasn't re-leveraged the agreement without the guarantor's consent. She hasn't. Not legally. Then we can file. He clicked his pen, leaned forward. We do this first thing Tuesday morning. No noise. Just a clean handoff. The bank notifies her, and the obligation falls back on her. Do it, I said. No hesitation. I walked out of that meeting with the kind of clarity that didn't need vengeance to feel satisfying. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to burn down the house we built. I was just going to take back what was mine, line by line. It was a strange kind of power, knowing I didn't have to beg to be seen anymore. I simply had to act. Elise had built her world on the foundation of my trust. But that trust had a shelf life. And Tuesday would be the day it expired. That night I made dinner. Salmon, her favorite, because it felt poetic to serve her something she loved while quietly extracting the thing she thought she owned. She came home late, kissed me absent-mindedly on the cheek, and started talking about the photo wall at the party. We'll have a legacy section, she said. Old logos, past campaigns, that sort of thing. Camden thinks it's smart to frame the evolution. Legacy's a good word, I said. Just make sure the right people are in it. She didn't catch the barb. She never did when it was laced in civility. Exactly, she said, pouring herself a glass of wine and disappearing into the office. I watched her go, the outline of her body familiar but distant, like a silhouette in a life I used to know. It was hard not to think of the early days, how we used to draft client decks in our pajamas, how she once cried on the floor after her first pitch tanked, and I sat beside her, quietly rerunning the numbers until we found a way through. I missed that woman, but I wasn't sure she ever existed. Or maybe she had briefly, and then shed that skin when she realized she no longer needed it. Tuesday came with the kind of blue sky that felt disingenuous. I put on a charcoal suit, not because it was required, but because there was something sacred about dressing with intention. Jasper filed the documents at exactly 9 a.m. I watched the email go out with the bank seal and confirmation request. That was it. No drama. No confrontation. Just a single notification that would make its way to Elise's inbox within the hour. The weight on my chest didn't lift right away. I didn't expect it to. But there was a quiet in me now, a certainty I hadn't felt in months. This was the start of something ending and also of something beginning. Elise would feel it soon. The foundation would shift, and she'd have to answer questions I no longer needed to be around for. I didn't wait for her reaction. I went to work, took my usual meetings, answered my emails. I wasn't going to wait for the storm. I was going to let it come find me on its own time. Because that's the thing about threads. Once you pull the right one, the whole thing unravels. Slowly, deliberately, and you don't have to lift another finger. After Jasper filed the withdrawal documents and the confirmation landed in my inbox, I closed the email with a quiet finality. There was no drama to it, no cinematic pause or pounding heartbeat. Just a click and a small breath that I didn't realize I'd been holding. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and poured myself a glass of water. That morning tasted like resolve. Not revenge. Just clean, clinical resolve. I didn't say a word to Elise. Not when she breezed into the kitchen wearing her silk blouse and her strategy heels. Not when she mentioned another meeting with Camden at the Vista Lounge that evening. Not when she kissed me on the cheek with the same distracted rhythm she used for checking notifications. She didn't notice the difference in my silence. Or maybe she'd grown too comfortable in it. Maybe she thought my stillness was permanent, a fixture she didn't need to check on anymore, like a lamp that had never failed to turn on when she flipped the switch. I made eggs and coffee, same as always. I packed my laptop bag, straightened my collar, and left for work like I did every Tuesday. But inside, I knew the wind had already shifted. I knew the storm was forming, quiet and precise, with each hour ticking us closer to impact. At the office, I took meetings as usual. Nothing in my face gave anything away. When my assistant, Jordan, asked if I wanted to confirm dinner with the dinner clients next week, I said yes and smiled. Everything was normal on the surface. But under the calm, there was the hum of anticipation, like the crackle of static before lightning touches down. I imagined Elise's day unfolding with its usual chaos, emails, caffeine, the illusion of control. I imagined her walking into that morning conference call, completely unaware that a subtle collapse was already happening beneath her feet. That by the time the bank's notification hit her CFO's inbox, the tremors would start. She wouldn't feel them right away. She'd see them in small things, confused glances, sudden quiet during meetings, a question or two she didn't expect from Harper Lou. She'd try to talk through it, brush it off. Elise had always been good at acting unbothered. But the discomfort would grow, quietly, like water under paint, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger. That evening, I cooked dinner again. Nothing extravagant, just roasted vegetables and salmon. Something simple, something familiar. Elise texted at 6:40. Going to grab drinks with Camden after Mixer. Don't wait up. I stared at the message for a full minute before locking my screen. No anger. No jealousy. Not even disappointment. Just a confirmation that she was doing exactly what I knew she would, assuming I'd stay on standby while she moved through her curated world. I ate alone, the clink of the fork against the plate sounding sharper than usual. The apartment was too clean, too still. I found myself staring at the wall across from the dining table, where we used to pin travel photos and handwritten quotes. Most of them were gone now. Elise said the wall looked cluttered, said it wasn't on brand anymore. So we cleared it. I hadn't realized, until that night, how many things she had quietly erased. I walked into the living room and stood there for a while, just looking around. The art on the walls was all hers. The books on the shelves were ones I never touched. The throw pillows, the designer coasters, the sculpture on the side table, all curated, all performative. Our home had become a showroom, a carefully lit replica of a life no one actually lived in. I picked up one of the coasters and turned it in my hand. It was heavy, marble, cold, like everything else now. When Elise finally came home sometime after 11, I was already in bed, reading. I heard her heels click through the foyer, then soften on the carpet. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. She climbed into bed without asking about my day. She didn't notice that my side of the nightstand was almost empty now. No wedding photo, no charger, no watch. She was on her phone for 15 minutes, replying to someone. Probably Camden. Or maybe just the press. I didn't ask. She turned out the light and rolled away from me, the space between us yawning wide enough to fit the silence we both learned to live with. I lay there in the dark, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. I wasn't waiting for her to say something. I knew she wouldn't. She thought everything was fine. She thought the storm hadn't arrived yet. But I knew better. The wind was already bending the trees. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and discover the doors we once walked through together had begun to close, one by one, behind her. Not with fury, not with fire, but with finality. At exactly 9:17 a.m., the first ripple arrived. I was in my office, seated across from a junior associate who was walking me through quarterly logistics on a new energy project we were consulting for. She was nervous, first presentation. And I gave her my full attention, nodding at all the right spots, asking gentle questions. The rhythm of routine settled around me. And then my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. It lit up again and again in my peripheral vision until the junior stopped talking, her eyes flicking toward it, uncertain. I picked it up to silence the vibration, and that's when I saw it, message after message stacking over each other like a collapsing house of cards. The first was from Elise's financial advisor. Graham, we need to talk. Urgent. Call me ASAP. Then came a second. There's an issue with the bank. Elise is unaware. Please respond. I didn't reply. I simply turned the phone over, face down on the table, and looked up at my associate. That was excellent, I said. Keep refining the estimates, and we'll run numbers again next week. She blinked at me, uncertain whether she should acknowledge the obvious. I gave her a reassuring smile, and she nodded before gathering her things and stepping out of the room. I sat there in silence for a moment, my hands folded neatly on the table. Then I turned the phone back over. 23 missed calls. Then 37. 48. By noon, the number ticked to 68. A few were from Elise. Most were from her board members, financial team, or Camden, his name appearing more than once, which amused me more than I expected. The voicemails began to flood in two, each one a variation of urgency, confusion, or the early twinges of panic. But one voicemail stood out. Harper Liu, Elise's CFO. Calm, polished, always collected. She was the one who handled everything Elise couldn't or wouldn't. She'd never called me before. But now her voice, slightly tied around the edges, spilled from my phone like a controlled detonation. Mr. Porter, this is Harper Liu. We've just been notified by Pinnacle Bank that the existing guarantor on the $1.5 million line has been removed. Elise wasn't aware of this change, and neither were we. The bank has requested immediate collateral reassessment or an amendment to the repayment terms. We urgently need your help clarifying this situation. She paused, and then added, please contact me before end of day. We're hoping this is a miscommunication. Clarify. That word made me smile. I hadn't smiled in days. Not genuinely. But now it surfaced, slow and deliberate. Clarify. As if this was a clerical error. As if I tripped over a form instead of making a decision Elise had trained me for with every disregard she handed out over the past 2 years. I replied with one word via text. Just like before. Understood. Then I silenced the phone again. Not because I was enjoying their unraveling, this wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity. They had written me out. Quietly. Elegantly. Systematically. Elise had curated a world where my contributions were footnotes, my presence diminished to tax benefits and background logistics. They'd used me to secure funding, to project stability, to extend their timeline past what any early firm should have been allowed. But the moment I asked for space, for acknowledgement, even for shared credit, I was too much, too inconvenient, too tethering. So now they would feel what it was like to stand without me. And I wasn't gloating. I was simply reclaiming the terms. I stepped out of my office and walked down to the street. The sun was sharp, but the air was cool. A rare kind of morning. I bought myself a coffee from a small kiosk on Fifth, the barista smiling without recognition, just a stranger in the city. I like that. I sat on a bench across from the bank's regional headquarters, sipping slowly, imagining Elise's day unraveling behind glass and granite. I pictured her at her desk, phone pressed to her cheek, demanding answers from Harper, from Camden, from the bank rep. I imagined her trying to spin it, trying to paint it as a glitch, a mistake, something she could pin on miscommunication or automation. But the truth was heavier than a glitch. The truth would sit in her gut like a stone. She'd realized this wasn't random. It was calculated. It was timed. And worst of all, it was silent. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a quiet shift that forced her to reckon with a world where I no longer held up her ceiling. Back at the office, I ignored another wave of calls. I didn't even read the messages anymore. I just let them accumulate like dust on a shelf. And when my assistant peeked in to say there was someone named Camden in the lobby who seemed stressed, I told her, calmly, tell him I'm not available. For the foreseeable future. She hesitated. Should I schedule something for next week? No, I said. If he calls again, just tell him I received the message. And I understand. It wasn't about games. It was about standards. I had lived under their version of partnership long enough. I'd worn the mask they gave me, smiled at events I wasn't acknowledged at, signed checks without asking for equity. But I wasn't doing it anymore. Elise would realize it first. Then Camden. Then the board. And maybe, if the silence grew loud enough, they'd ask themselves how they failed to notice the man who'd held the threads of their empire together. Until he didn't. By 3 p.m., the storm had officially made landfall. Elise showed up at our apartment like the fire alarm had gone off inside her ribcage. Her hair, usually smooth and shellacked in place, had begun to frizz at the edges. Her blouse was rumpled, her eyes glassy from a mix of fury and disbelief. She didn't knock. She still had her key. She burst in like the place owed her an explanation, like she expected to walk in and find me pacing with a sheepish apology rehearsed. But I was calm. Too calm. I was in the middle of slicing an apple in the kitchen, wearing the same gray sweater she'd once said made me look reliable. She paused in the doorway, the echo of the door slamming behind her still settling into the walls. You pulled the loan, she said. No greeting. No preamble. Yes, I replied, placing the apple slices into a bowl. She stared at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. You didn't even tell me. You didn't tell me about the party. Or the rebrand. That's not the same. It is to me, I said, turning to face her fully now. You decided I wasn't a partner anymore. I just made the paperwork reflect that. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out right away. I watched her jaw work through the response she thought might still grant her control. But the room didn't bend for her this time. Graham, this is going to destroy everything we've built. I stepped around the counter and stood a few feet from her. No, I said. You destroyed everything when you erased me from it. I just stepped back from something I was never invited to in the first place. It was a joke, she said suddenly, her voice rising. The text. The party. It was a stupid, tone-deaf joke. I wasn't thinking. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I just pulled a folded sheet of paper from my back pocket and handed it to her. It was the printed party invitation. The one with the new logo. The one that read Crest Strategies in sleek serif font, as if the last 9 years hadn't happened. Is this a joke too? I asked. She didn't answer. You curated the list, Elise. You planned the entire thing. You changed the name. You didn't just forget me. You wrote me out. I didn't want to fight with you, she said, her voice cracking around the edges now. You've always hated the spotlight. I thought you'd be happier behind the scenes. You mean invisible, I corrected. You thought I'd stay useful and silent, that I'd keep signing forms, paying invoices, and smiling through every event where I'm introduced as Graham from accounting. She dropped the paper on the table like it burned. You could have talked to me, she said. We could have worked this out. I did talk to you, Elise, I said, voice steady. I talked to you for years. With my actions. With my patience. With every compromise I made to protect your vision. And every time, you showed me what mattered more to you: control, optics, applause. And when I didn't fit into that anymore, you rewrote the story. She looked around like the room was betraying her, like even the furniture was starting to take sides. You think you've made your point? She asked. You think pulling your name and walking away gives you some kind of moral victory? No, I said quietly. I'm not interested in victory. I'm interested in peace. She blinked. That part caught her off guard. Then why now? She whispered. Why pull out just when things are going right? I studied her. Really studied her. Not the confident executive she projected in meetings. Not the curated woman on magazine covers. But Elise, tired, cornered, unraveling. Because I realized something, I said. I realized I was fighting for a seat at a table I helped build. And I was doing it out of loyalty, not respect. You never respected me, Elise. Not truly. You used me. Maybe not cruelly, maybe not with malice. But you used me. And the second you thought I wasn't necessary anymore, you cut me out. That's not true, she said, too quickly. You were the reason I started. You were the foundation. Foundations don't get invitations. They get buried, I said. And I'm done being the concrete you walk over. She turned her back then, like she needed a wall to lean on, like the weight of what I was saying had finally begun to register in her spine. Camden says this could cost us everything, she muttered. He's already fielding calls from investors. Harper's threatening to resign. The bank's demanding updated collateral. The board wants an emergency meeting. I said nothing. I let her sit in that cascade of consequences. I watched as the woman who had spent years building her empire suddenly realized what it meant to build on something you assumed would never shift. Why didn't you fight me? She asked, finally turning back to face me, her eyes wet but defiant. Why didn't you throw it in my face when you saw this coming? Because I didn't want to fight, I said. I just wanted to be seen. And when I realized that wasn't going to happen, not really, I chose something else. I stepped out of the ring. You can't do this, she whispered. You already did, I replied. Then I walked past her, past the table where we used to eat takeout, past the living room we designed together with books we never read anymore. And I left her there, standing in the home we once shared, surrounded by the echoes of a partnership that had never truly been equal. The first few days after I walked out of that conversation were strangely quiet. Elise didn't come home that night, and I didn't ask where she went. I didn't check her location. I didn't text. I just sat in the living room, turned off the television, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the pipes, the muted echo of a life that had lost its script. It should have felt empty, but it didn't. It felt clean, clear, like something honest had finally been spoken aloud in a house where so much had been hidden behind carefully curated silence. I started waking up earlier, even before my alarm. Not because of anxiety, but because something in me had shifted. The sleep I was getting was heavier, deeper, like my body was finally allowed to rest after years of bracing. Elise didn't return that week. I didn't see her name on the security log for the building. No messages. No more voicemails. Just absence. Which, ironically, felt more real than her presence had for months. Maybe that's what honesty looks like when the mask finally cracks. It doesn't scream. It vanishes. But the consequences of truth don't vanish. They spread. By Thursday, I began hearing things from friends on the periphery. Tyler from my firm's legal advisory team mentioned over lunch that a few of Elise's top-tier clients were quietly exploring other firms. They're saying there's instability at Crest, he said, trying to sound casual but clearly fishing. I didn't offer anything. I just nodded and asked how his wife's business was going. Then came the call from Harper Lou. She didn't leave a voicemail this time. She just called and called until, eventually, I picked up, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to hear the exact temperature of Elise's unraveling. Mr. Porter, she said, tone sharp and controlled, but with the kind of tension that only came from juggling fires. I know this is unconventional, but I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time. I said nothing. I understand the legal withdrawal. That was your right. What I'm calling about is the fallout. Elise's not handling this strategically. The investors are asking about the shift in leadership. Camden's involvement is being questioned. And I'm fielding concerns about how this company was capitalized in its early stages. It's not just financial now, it's reputational. I almost asked her what she expected me to do, but she beat me to it. We need your statement of detachment. A formal one. Something that reassures stakeholders you've exited in peace, that there's no lawsuit, no pending financial misconduct. Otherwise, this becomes a witch hunt. And Elise. I think you know she's not equipped for that kind of pressure. The irony nearly made me laugh. The woman who had once called herself independent from the ground up was now bleeding out under the weight of the very scaffolding she tried to demolish. I told Harper I'd think about it. Then I hung up and stared at my reflection in the window for a long time. That weekend, Elise showed up. She didn't use her key this time. She knocked. I opened the door and found her standing there without makeup, her eyes red-rimmed, her blouse unbuttoned at the collar like she hadn't slept properly in days. There was something brittle in her posture, something I hadn't seen in years. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I stepped aside, and she entered like she was stepping into a house she no longer recognized. And maybe she didn't, because I had moved things, rearranged the books, taken down the photo from Paris, not out of pettiness, just necessity. I couldn't keep living in a museum of someone else's narrative. I know you hate me right now, she said, sitting slowly on the couch. I don't hate you, Elise, I replied. I just stopped allowing myself to be used by you. She nodded, looking down at her hands, twisting the edge of her sleeve between her fingers. I miss you, she said. Do you miss me, or do you miss what I did for you? I asked. She looked up, and for once, there was no immediate answer. No smooth deflection. Just that pause. That silence where a truth was finally trying to emerge. I don't know, she whispered. That's the worst part. I don't know. It wasn't a manipulation. Not this time. There was no edge in her voice, no performative quiver. Just honest confusion from someone whose entire identity was built on forward momentum. Elise had never learned to pause, to examine. She'd only ever learned to push harder. I wasn't trying to erase you, she said. I thought I was protecting the image. Investors want autonomy. They want vision without strings. I thought if I showed them we were independent. You mean if you showed them I wasn't necessary? I interrupted. That you were the story, and I was the footnote. Tears slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe them. I know I broke something, she said, and I'm not asking you to fix it. I need you to know that I never thought you'd actually leave. I sat across from her and studied the space between us. It was deeper than the room. It was time, history, choices. It was all the dinners where she looked through me, all the decisions she made without me, all the moments I let slide because I thought love meant endurance. I didn't leave, I said. You walked ahead so far, you stopped noticing I wasn't next to you anymore. She nodded slowly, like she'd known it was true all along, but hearing it aloud still hurt in a new way. I lost Harper, she said. She resigned yesterday. Said she couldn't work in an environment that lacked transparency. Camden's trying to salvage the board, but it's unraveling. Fast. I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. I just let the words land. We're married, she said. Softer now. Can't we fix this? I looked at her, really looked at her, past the smeared mascara and the undone blouse. I looked at the woman I used to believe in, the one I used to think I was building something with. And I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was free. You stopped being married to me the moment you reduced me to a credit score, I said. She broke then, not dramatically, not loudly, just a slow collapse inward. She stood, nodded, and walked toward the door like she knew this was the final scene, not just a pause. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say sorry. And I never heard her say either again. But the silence that followed, it wasn't hollow. It was peace. It was finally, mercifully mine. 2 months after the last conversation with Elise, the name was officially gone. I didn't need an announcement. I didn't wait for a press release or some smug social media post trying to repackage failure as evolution. I just checked the Secretary of State's business registry one morning out of quiet curiosity, and there it was in black and white, Crest Strategies, LLC. No Porter. No trace of what used to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle in me. Not grief. Not anger. Not even satisfaction. Just a strange, quiet fullness. Like a door had finally been closed and locked from the inside. It was mid-October when we held the launch event for my own firm. Jasper had been the first to suggest it, a few weeks after my legal disentanglement finalized. You've spent years building everyone else's vision, he'd said over coffee. Maybe it's time to build your own. And then came Neha Alcott. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 5 years. She'd moved to Seattle, taken a job with a multinational, gone dark like most people do when careers and cities pull at the same time. But when she saw the news of Harper's resignation and the quiet collapse of Crest, she emailed me. Heard what happened, she wrote. I always thought you were the brains behind the structure. If you're ever ready to build something real, I'm in. It was the kind of message you read twice, not because you doubt it, but because something about it lands with more grace than you're used to receiving. We met, talked, sketched outlines on napkins and legal pads and whiteboards until a shape began to form. A firm that didn't run on ego or empty promises. Something honest, clean, elegant. It didn't need to roar. It just needed to work. We called it Porter Advisory, not and Partners, not Global Solutions. Just Porter, my name. My terms. At the opening event, we rented out a modest space in the Arts District. No rooftop skyline, no drone footage, just good wine, honest lighting, and people who actually meant the compliments they offered. I wore a navy suit, tailored, the kind Elise used to say made me look too traditional. But that night, I didn't care. I didn't need to blend into anyone else's aesthetic. I stood in front of a modest crowd, clients, friends, former colleagues, and gave a short speech. I spent years helping others find their story, I said, often from behind the scenes, sometimes from beneath the weight of what they didn't want to carry themselves. And I don't regret that. Every experience, every late night, every quiet contribution, it brought me here. But there comes a moment when you stop asking for a seat at someone else's table, when you stop waiting to be included, and you build your own. Someone asked during the Q&A, lightheartedly, "So what does the name Porter stand for now?" I looked at them, smiled, and answered plainly, "For what's no longer borrowed. For what's finally mine." There were nods, claps, not loud, but real. Jasper pulled me aside later that evening, sipping his whiskey like he was taste testing a verdict. "You seem different," he said. "I feel different. Peaceful." Peaceful, I confirmed. Not because everything's perfect, but because everything is mine. He raised his glass. "To clarity." "To clarity," I echoed. I hadn't seen Elise since that day in the apartment. She never reached out. No follow-up. No dramatic letters. And maybe that was her final act of control, refusing to give me the closure I never asked for. But I didn't need her words anymore. I had seen the truth in her silences, in the choices she made long before the mask cracked. And now, that absence didn't ache. It was just space I could fill with something better. There were moments, though, brief flashes, when I would remember something and feel it flicker. The way her laugh used to catch me off guard. The way she used to lean against the kitchen counter, barefoot, scribbling ideas on napkins with a glass of wine in hand. But those memories had become like photos buried in a box, softened, faded, no longer alive. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Harper Lou. She looked the same, sleek, precise, unreadable, but there was a warmth in her eyes I hadn't expected. "Porter Advisory," she asked, gesturing toward the signage. "Guilty," I said. She nodded. "I always wondered what you'd do if you stepped out of her shadow. Turns out, I cast one of my own." She smiled at that, almost imperceptibly. "Crest's trying to recover," she said. "But it's slow. The trust is gone. Camden's gone. Investors pulled most of the equity. Elise, she's still spinning. But I think even she knows now, it's not just about names on a door. It's about who actually opened it." "I hope she finds peace," I said, and I meant it. "Do you?" Harper asked, eyebrow raised. I looked at her and thought for a moment. "I hope she learns how to tell the truth. That's more useful than peace." She nodded again, this time with a small bow of respect. "Good luck, Graham." "You too, Harper." As she walked away, I stood for a moment and looked up at the sign above my office door. The gold lettering caught the sunlight just right. Porter Advisory. Clean. Quiet. Mine. No borrowed foundations. No invisible labor. No negotiated dignity. Just the name I was born with. And a life I built without apology. People think loss is loud. They imagine heartbreak in screaming matches, in doors slammed, in plates shattered. But for me, the loudest sound was silence. The silence of realizing I had been the only one clapping at our shared victories. The only one holding us together while she curated applause from strangers. But the beauty of silence is that it creates room. Room to listen to yourself again. Room to hear your own voice. Not just the echo of someone else's ambition bouncing off your ribcage. And in that room, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Myself. I don't chase recognition anymore. I don't care who sees the work or who thanks me for showing up. I just show up. Fully. Uncompromised. Present. Because I've learned something Elise never did. Being needed is not the same as being valued. And love without respect is just polite captivity. I used to think the absence of a partner meant failure. Now I know it simply means opportunity. An open page. A fresh blueprint. A name, unborrowed. A future, built on my terms.